Hello and welcome to the latest developer diary. So I want to be this time talking about some changes and fixes and improvements I've made for movement and also for memory usage. And you'll also get to see the first pass of some of the new carriages that are around. So let's take a look. So things have changed a little bit. I have switched over to, previously I was building the carriages in Magic of Voxel. I've switched over to using Cubicle for it. The main reason for that was it was because I got a lot of pieces that need to fit together. It was becoming a little bit tricky for managing that with Magic of Voxel. So I found switching to Cubicle made that a lot easier. And so we can see the movement is a little bit more reliable now as well. We've got stairs that can very comfortably move along quite easily. And there's actually quite a lot of areas there where we can be moving through. This bit where you're going around a corner is, I think, possibly my favorite part in this. I really just like the visuals of how it looks at that particular point in time. But it's taken a bunch of fixes to get to this point. So let's take a look at some of the changes and fixes that I needed to make. So one of the big ones was actually for the movement of the character. And this was something where I completely didn't know that this was a thing until I was running into the issues. So my player is a rigid body based character. It's using a custom controller that I made. And so it's a rigid body based controller moving on a moving platform. So there's some challenges there. One of the things being that I need to be parenting the player to the particular platforms. The big challenge though was that what I found was stairs would work, and they would work as long as I wasn't moving. If I was moving, they would immediately, I was tending to have them breaking. And what was breaking was this. The grounded check was flip-flopping between thinking it was grounded and that it wasn't. And this raycast, the sphere cast here, was failing. And so that was one problem that was happening. The other problem that was happening intermittently was when I was moving really quickly. So I have a bit of logic here for being able to step up onto things. So that logic was causing the character to be able to move really, really, really fast if they were moving in the opposite direction of movement to the train, which makes a level of sense that that's an error that seems like it's reasonable to have happen, but it's also really problematic. Really handy if someone's wanting to get to the end of the train, but the flip side of it was that it meant the movement heading towards the front of the train was slower. And what I tracked it back to was I was using transform position a lot in my character motor. So I was using that for here where it was needing to teleport and move the player. I was using it for all of my raycasts. So all of the raycasts that were happening, the sphere casts that were happening, all of these were using transform position. And on a non-moving environment, that was fine. But in a moving environment, that position can actually be different to the rigid body position. Because when you access rigid body position, it goes through the physics system. So it's getting and setting data as it currently stands in the physics system. Whereas using transform position is not. And that was what was happening. There was stuff that was out of sync. So what I did for now, I'll probably change this at a later point. And the reason I set it up as a property was just so that I can be easily changing this and test transform position versus rigid body position. But I set up a property and that fixed the problem. The speed is now consistent regardless of where I move. I can move up and down the stairs very comfortably. All of that works quite reliably. Now, the setup for those carriages is a little bit complex, so I don't use mesh colliders for them. what I actually have, if we take a look at our carriage, is I have set up custom collision for everything. So every single one of these, none of these use mesh colliders, they all use box colliders. And that means even for things like of the stairs, so we have the individual walls, we have the actual ramps up, all of that is done via these box colliders. That way I have very simple collision, very fast collision, and it means that the visual side, it can be a little bit, gives me a little bit more freedom for it. It doesn't need to be absolutely, if I was going to stick with using mesh colliders, there'd be bits where having the level of complexity could start to get really messy. So I've switched to those simplified colliders. That's helped. These carriages also, as I was saying, I've got lots of components to these. So what we're seeing here at the moment is actually a very heavily upgraded carriage. The base version is actually going to look a lot less than that. The initial version that someone will have will actually look a lot more like of this with the no stairs part in. This is what the actual very, very base version will look like. And then as you upgrade it, you can add in things like, okay, we'll add in lightning rods. There's currently planned for there being lightning. So there'll be lightning rods that we can add in. There will be things like railings. And then eventually, as we have more upgrades, there'll be stuff like we get stairs and our upper platform, which that will automatically get railings. There's then a lightning rods for the upper platform. And then we have the different carriages. So we'll have a solar one. So we get base version with a few solar panels, some basic batteries. Then there'll be the level 2 upgrade. We get some bigger, chunkier batteries. And then level 3, we get a upper level. Again, more batteries, way more solar panels. So there'll be a solar car. There's going to be one that is just a general battery car. And this is just going to be all about storing large amounts of power. And so we'll have that. Alongside that, there is also going to be, we have a storage car, which the storage car is going to, as its name suggests, provide a lot of storage. So a lot of these are going to have sections that will fairly heavily occlude the environment. It's kind of intentional. I want to have it be stuff where there is a mix of things that are going to take away your ability to know stuff that's happening. And that's a very intentional thing there with it. So there's still a few more different carriages to make. There's obviously the texturing that's going to need to happen for these. That's going to be a bit of a later stage at the moment, just getting all of the visual language for what, okay, what does a battery always look like? What does a storage area always look like? Because there's going to be some carriages that have common elements there for that. So just getting a sense of what all of those are going to be. Some other changes that made, because have also improved the movement of the carriages themselves. And this was something where previously I was doing, so how it was working previously was I track a distance in tile of the engine. I use that to place the head marker for the engine. And then I find where that tail marker intersects with the rail line. And I use that as the actual to calculate the position. And I was then using that same process of finding that intersection for the tail marker. I was using that for placing the other carriages. The problem with that was it was very easy where a small error at the lead carriage could then build up and up and up. And because I want to be able to support, up to 100 carriages, that could mean huge errors by the end. So they were really jumping around a lot. So now what happens is the carriage, every single carriage, uses the distance-based approach. All it does, and this was something that originally I didn't think was actually going to work. I originally thought this was actually going to introduce problems, but it actually worked out completely fine. So what I do is for every carriage, from that lead one, I just subtract a set distance based upon the length of the carriage and the spacing. So I could handle different sized carriages if I need to as well, which is really handy. And I just use that distance to track the locations. That has worked much, much, much more reliably. They move quite smoothly, and at high speeds. That's working very, very well for it. So the movement's been a lot better. The other thing that I've done is I was getting some memory leaks. And this was happening in the terrain generation. And this was something that I had never really sort of done terrain generation at runtime where it's continuously doing it. And so there was a couple of things I was running into that I didn't realize were an issue. So if we take a look at the blending, and it was the blending that was causing issues, and in particular, these transfer functions. So this is the new version. What I previously had was here, because I'm reading from the vertices in a previous tile. I actually just had this here, down here. So I had it like that. And I did that for the vertices and also for the colors. That was generating about 120 megs of allocations every single time it was spawning a tile, which meant I was getting a huge spike. Because what was happening was every single time this loop ran, it was going, and when you access the vertices, that was actually doing an allocation behind the scenes. So this was doing an allocation, and it was then going and throwing that, essentially that junk on the heap, because it was allocating for all of those vertices. I was accessing one of them, then throwing it away, then doing it again and again and again. Did the same for colors. So that same set of vertices was getting duplicated, essentially once for each vertex on an edge, which at the moment, if we take a look at the tiles, we'll be able to see the sort of size there. So if we take a look at the generation, these are 128 by 128. So I was creating 128 copies of that 128 by 128 vertices, and then doing the same thing with the colors. So it was really expensive because it was lots of allocations. It was, every time with those tiles, it's 256 allocations of quite large amounts of data. So it was creating a huge spike, which is super temporary data that it then needed to garbage collect. And that was causing big issues. So changing that to just caching the data once, all of those memory issues have gone away, those performance issues have gone away, and as we can see, when it runs, the performance is currently really quite good. And this is the performance where I've already got a little bit of post-processing stuff set up with this. But even with that, I'm worst case sort of here looking down the length of the train, and I'm getting pretty reliably over 200 frames per second. It's running quite solidly with that, to the extent where one of the next things I'm actually going to be testing and trialing out is I'm going to test out with this using the high definition pipeline. So I'm going to, once I've got more of the carriages going and got a good representation there for that, I'm going to convert the project over to HDRP just as a test, because if it can run in HDRP, the options I have then in terms of post-processing and how it works with stuff like shadows are significantly better. Because at the moment for post-processing options, it is limited with the setup for the universal pipeline. I'm not going to be able to push the visuals there as much as I would like, because I still want low poly terrain and I still want the voxel-based carriages and voxel-based environmental elements. But I would really like to be able to push the visual effects, the post-processing stuff there. So that's going to be one of the big next things after I finish building all of the carriages, is testing in the high definition pipeline, and then also seeing how much I can get away with ramping up those visuals. At the moment, it feels like I've got a lot of headroom for those visuals. I'm not confident of how much of that will remain just from the switch alone to high def pipeline. That's going to be kind of one of the things that'll be fun to find out. But my hope is it's going to be okay, because one of the moments that I really want people to be able to have is standing on top of their train and watching a really cool sunrise or sunset. And that's something that I know HDRP is going to allow me to do that to a level that Universal is not going to be able to easily hit. It's going to be a lot easier in high def. So that's going to be the next thing to be trialing out with that. Thanks, folks. I hope you found the update interesting. I have put another gist together that has some of the updated code there for things like the character and also for the ProcGen-based terrain mesh. So those updates are in there. And so if you want to check out any of that code, the link for that's in the description below. If you have got any questions, chuck in a comment below. But until next time, bye.